Thank you, praise band, for that reminder that we are not alone. I'm so excited today because today we have the program director of our graduate biblical counseling program, Dr. Jeff Cox. I don't know, many of you are familiar with him. He is coming back to join us today. I wanted to share, as I look through our website and his bio, there's just a quick favorite memory as a Calvary student. One of his degrees is from Calvary, and his favorite memory reads this way. I remember being in the library with Dr. Nelson. Some of you know Dr. Nelson, Dr. Bahrain, and Dr. Bonine. Maybe if you've had their classes, they're retiring this year. But he references Dr. Nelson here. I remember being in the library with Dr. Nelson researching a paper for his class. I was taking a position different from his. When I told him my position, he left and returned with a stack of books that would assist me in articulating my view. I remember thinking, that's the kind of seminary teacher I would like to be one day. I'm so happy to welcome Dr. Jeff Cox.
So in 1865, a book's written that ended up being a book that contained one of my favorite leadership principles. It's about a girl who falls through a rabbit hole and meets many characters. And it is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, later shortened Alice in Wonderland. Now, you'll think that's just something I'm saying, but if you would come to my house, and I have an office there, my wife Jan and I share, there is a picture that has Alice, the quote I'm about to give you, and the other character in the story. The other character is a Cheshire cat, and Alice is going on her journey, and she comes to the Cheshire cat, and she asks the question, which way should I go? And then the Cheshire cat responds back, and he goes, it depends on where you want to get to. Alice says, I don't really care where. And then the Cheshire cat responds, then it doesn't really matter. Once again, the Cheshire cat says, if you don't know where you want to end up, it doesn't really matter what path you take. I had the privilege this last weekend, we had at the church I attend, Abundant Life, we had a leader from, oh really? Wow, a few here, okay. They had this leadership intensive, so I spoke at that and did some breakouts, and I shared some of this, but I was thinking appropriately for college students when I thought about this time. So, I teach here counseling classes, most of you know, masters in biblical counseling, do leadership principles. We have a leadership institute at our church. And so we read a lot of things that you could say would be found in secular leadership principles, New York Times bestseller list on leadership books. We're going to read those things and teach them. What amazes me is how often these principles that are found in these books are readily seen in the Bible. Okay. So I'm going to tell you a story. And since it's kind of counselorish when I talk, I'll give you some emotional intelligence stuff on it. I'm going to give you 4 questions to ask. The story's told by Jesus. It's a very famous story. In English, we call it the sower and the seed. If you were to read it in German, it's called the 4 types of ground, because it's really not much about a sower or the seed. It's about 4 types of ground. And I'm going to go through 4 questions, and I'm going to give you out of that. Now, here's the thing. Most of you, I hope you're at Bible college, you know the parable. It's about a farmer throwing out seed, and the goal is to have a harvest. Fair enough? Usually when this is taught, we end up going down a rabbit hole. That wasn't intentional. Trying to guess who in the parable's a Christian. Trying to decide who's really saved, what you have to do to be saved, and it ends up into this huge theological debate. And that's a great topic that I'm not going to do. But I'm going to take it from the position that these 4 questions I'm going to give you that come from that, you can ask yourself these questions at any time in your life. Meaning it's not like you're just in because I became a Christian, and then for the rest of my life, I'm the person that never quits when I'm persecuted. You know what I'm saying? That's not how I feel Jesus would have taught it. So if you don't know the story, I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you quickly. Telling the story, he's in a boat. He's offshore. There's a crowd. It's an agrarian society. That means they understand agriculture. That means a lot of the parables will have to do with agriculture. He has his disciples there, and he's going to tell the story. What makes this unique is he'll actually tell the interpretation, because when no one understands it, he's going to take his disciples off to the side and tell them what it means. So I'm not trying to throw out a question you don't have the answer to, but tell me, what would have been the age that we can most likely determine his disciples would have been? Yeah, your age. So look at yourself. So I always, when anyone gives you any trouble or anything, like you're not mature enough yet, because I grew up in church, and every time I heard like the apostles put up there, they were like guys who looked like me, except they had more hair. I don't know. They had like big beards, gray, and you're thinking all these old guys are around following Jesus. Highly unlikely in that tradition back then. So Jesus teaching that probably 31 to 32. And so everyone following him, probably about your age. So he's going to give the interpretation. So here's the story. I'm not going to put the verses up here. I'm just going to, this is like worse than the New Living Translation. This is Jeff's total paraphrase, okay? So if I forget something, don't hold me to that, okay? So here we go. There's a farmer, and he throws seed. And basically, some of it falls on a path. There's no root at all, and birds come eat it. Will there be a harvest, yes or no? No, and there's not. The next goes into what he calls stony ground or rocky ground, and it's kind of odd. It sprouts up just a little bit, and the sun comes out. When the sun comes out, scorches it. Once again, will there be a harvest? No. Nope. Finally, he throws it on some ground where it does take root, and it grows. But he calls it thorny ground. There's an alien vegetation there, and it eventually strangles it. So, once again, there's no what? Harvest. And then some of the seed falls to the good ground, and hey, you have a harvest. Pretty simple story. And everyone's questioning, and there's this verse in there about why he tells parables and all that. Then he takes the disciples over to the side. So here is what I find. And so if I would just give you anything this morning, especially where you are in your journey, following God, you're somewhat serious about something, or you wouldn't be at a Bible college. Fair enough? And so you look at that. So here's what I hear and see a lot when I do training, and you find this, and I find this at Abundant Life when we do training. Why do people want to be leaders? It's a great question. That's not one of the four I'm going to give you. And here's the bottom line. Sometimes to be fulfilled, to find their purpose in life, in other vocations, and I'm not criticizing this, hey, I'll make more money if I rise to be a higher leader. It could be a lot of those things. So this is going to seem really simple. So the Cheshire Cat is really asking Alice what matters. If you're a farmer, why are you a farmer? So here's all the answers I'll give you that aren't right. I'm really fulfilled as a farmer. That's my goal. I just wanted to do that. I took a personality test. I went to farming college, and I thought, I'd like that. I'd enjoy that. I like the sun. I like dirt. I like soil. I really feel in touch with nature and the earth when I'm in the soil. Someday maybe I'll retire from being a farmer, and people say, that was a great farmer. He was an excellent farmer. One day I can teach other people how to be a farmer. Now I'm really being a smart aleck. I get it. This isn't the trick question. And anyone who grew up and was a farmer. Why? What's the goal of farming? Don't make it hard. Thank you. Gold star. Yeah. If you've done it, you're self-actualized, people are coming to listen to you, you're on a podcast, but if nothing comes out of the ground, it's a failure. All right? So, what matters to the farmer is a crop. It's that simple. That's the whole point of the parable. He has a definitive way to measure whether or not he's what? Successful. Okay? Now, I'm not going to over-spiritualize this, but basically, Jesus isn't telling the parable here to teach an agrarian society how to do horticulture. That's not his goal. Okay? The goal is You'll know the fruit as people become disciples and they follow me, okay? That's what he's getting at. They're going to hear the message about my kingdom, and they're going to do that. But then he's going to tell 3 ways that won't happen. But I'll give you the first question. If you want to remember the 4 questions I'll give you is this, to ask yourself. Number 1, what matters? They'll give you the counseling side, so we'll jump in applicable things. Somebody's having an affair on their spouse. And they're sitting in counseling. This happened this week. They're in the affair. Say they're a believer. Don't like their current marriage. Not really happy to go back. The person they're in an affair with, this is a train wreck waiting to happen. They even have enough self-awareness to know that. You sit here and think, wow, it seems fairly obvious. The person should do what? This isn't deep counseling. What should they do? Break up with the other person and try to have a good marriage with their spouse. Why would that get complicated? It's not. What complicates it is, to this person, what really what? Oh, yeah. What matters? Does graduating matter to all of you? Kind of an honest answer. Thank you. Vulnerability, authenticity. Now, I will say this. I somewhat could say attending a college matters to you. What would be the evidence of that? You're here, unless you're not, on community service for a work release with the authorities. But other than that, I'm going to give you the break that you all really got here. It's not like, and some of you psychologically could have other reasons. But basically, that matters to you. What will tell if graduating matters to you? If you graduate, if you actually study, if you actually take the class. Now, you think I'm being facetious here, but you'll be able to tell pretty quickly what matters to people and everything. But you have to decide what matters to you. And so with the farmer, what matters is grow things. I love that stuff. I will steal that from you completely, rather than some big theological harvest, living things come out of dirt. I mean, that's what matters. He's going out there, anything growing. What matters to you will determine your life. So as a leader, as you're growing, you have to decide that right now, because really that will determine what paths you take in your life. It will. And if what matters to you cannot be defined, or it doesn't really matter, or you don't know, here's the sad thing. Cheshire Cat's pretty wise. Then it doesn't really matter what path you take. Does that make sense? If graduating doesn't matter to you, and it can't just be graduating, it could be, hopefully, I feel like this university will equip me to be a leader, to see the harvest. Are you with me? If that doesn't drive you, you say, here's the deal. I did get the degrees. I did get the master's. I did get the doctorate. I did do this. Oh, you must have really liked school. Never really did. You teach at a school. I know. What does matter to you? What matters to you is what the education and the training could open up to invest in people's lives. Because I can't train counselors without this path. Does that make sense? And that consumed me. So the first question is what matters. All right, the next one. This is the one where Satan enters in. So Jesus takes all the disciples. He says, I'm going to tell you what the parable means. So the first one is simply this. The seed falls on the path, not really even ground, just a side part over from the field. Birds come eat it. And he says that's like Satan coming. And as soon as the message of the kingdom goes out, it doesn't even begin. Satan comes, snatches it away. There is no harvest. So I'm going to give you a really practical way in leadership with this. Well, they have no understanding. This is not an IQ test. This is not a cognitive ability test. It's like they're not smart enough to follow Jesus. That's never what he's talking about here. But it basically means this. They never even got off the ground with learning. Are you with me? So I would say, here's the next question. First of all, what matters? Here's the biggest one. In this one, am I teachable? Am I teachable? And you will ask that, hopefully, the rest of your life. In counseling, sometimes you'll hit a roadblock or a wall, and somebody says, well, why don't you just be more direct with them, or yell more, or quote more scripture, or something like that. And what we do usually as counselors, at least counselors we're training, is we respond this. They're not receiving any new information. You can talk, you can share, tell a story, try to ask questions, try to probe, try to do all these things. They're just not receiving any new information, meaning they're no longer what? Teachable. That happens all the time. You say, well, I'm a student, so by definition, am I not teachable? So here's where I'm going to push the envelope. As long as I'm up here saying things that you already agree with or fits in your worldview, you'll probably listen to me. Well, you might not listen to me because you think I'm boring. But other than that, you might listen to me. But here's the reality. If I start pushing the envelope, and I do this, okay, outside of your norm, your worldview, whatever, a wall can go up in about 2 seconds. What I mean is you're no longer teachable. All you're doing is receiving information as long as it already agrees with what you think. Well, how do I know if I'm like that? Well, let me tell you this. If you're in an argument, is your goal to learn or is your goal to win? If you're in a discussion and you don't agree with somebody, are you waiting your turn to talk or are you listening to what they say? If I look through your podcast, your social media, where you receive news, is it basically just an echo chamber of your confirmation bias to confirm what you already believe and you never learn anything new and you can't be challenged? Most people it is. The reason is because all the algorithms based on your apps advertise to you on what you already have. Now, some of that's good. If you look at my feed, I'm surprised how much Christian stuff I get. That's good. It shows I look at Christian stuff. But sometimes when all the Christian stuff comes from one point of view, I'm thinking, man, I must be reading stuff that already agrees with what? That. I'm not saying that the point is that you don't have definitive things you believe, but I'm telling you when it comes to your life, will you ask yourself this question, am I teachable? Can I learn something new? So here's what we always do. Jesus comes, hey, the kingdom's here. Hey, I'm the Messiah. And we think, well, people should have just followed him. Wow, you wait for that your whole life. You've been taught to look for that. Finally, a guy shows up and he says, I am that. Do you see the problem, if we're honest, to just think that he's finally arrived, yes or no? Am I the only one? The reason the miracles, I feel, and this is dispensationally, had to happen is because it had to be proven. Of all the people, all the rabbis that come about, he says, I'm the one, and you're going to go follow him. Even his own disciples at times had difficulty following him. Even after he tells them 3 times, I'm going to die and come back from the dead, they're still struggling, and he goes, I told you over and over again. But you know what his disciples had? When other people walked away, they said, you're the only ones who have these words. They were still teachable. So number 1, what matters to you? Number 2, am I teachable? How do I know I'm not teachable? You end up with confirmation bias, and you quit learning. You just pretty much agree with stuff that you already believe. Does that make sense? You don't want to be that. The next one is the stony ground or the rocks. This one's pretty clear. The sun scorches. So what's that? Jesus says this is 2 things, persecution and adversity. So I'll give you the question. I'm going to tell you really 3 quick stories, and I'll go through them quickly. But here's a tough one. Ask yourself, will I quit? Well, I don't want to quit. There'll come a time in your life you'll want to. Adversity and persecution. I had a lady at the church I came to me for counseling about 6 years ago. Her husband had died. She had been in ministry with him for years. She was grieving, started out with the counseling. Talked to her through that. Somewhat unexpected, and her whole identity was doing things with him in ministry. From there, she taught something at our church called Grief Share, where she led other people in grief. From there, she became a leader of the group in Grief Share. From there, actually, I worked with her at our counseling center at the church I go to, and she became a grief coach. And she said in my office 6 years later from that day, and now she's trained somebody else to be a grief coach, and she's going on. Now, I'm not saying everyone works through their pain the same way. I do not know your path, and I'll give you the answer as a counselor. I'm not telling you what you're supposed to do. But I know this. She didn't quit. I got a couple that I've told this story before when I spoke here, and Probably about 3 years ago, I met him counseling them because their 18-month-old was involved in an accident and died. There is no grief like losing a child. They used to work in our children's ministry at our church. They couldn't even go back there. Couldn't even walk back there. And I'm not saying they should ever do that again, but they could not. The other day, I'm talking to the wife, and she's kind of, I joke with her. She gave me a hard time about this. She shared it the other day. She's kind of arguing with me about our children's curriculum because she's a leader back there again. And her husband was filling in that day. And I'm not saying everyone takes that path. But I can tell you this, she didn't what? Quit. We have a student minister, a pastor at our church. Started working at Abundant Life. I met him. His name's Tashawn. He leads student ministry. Well, how'd you meet Tashawn? I met Tashawn when his mom committed suicide. His dad was already dead. In counseling. All my stories are counseling stories. I don't know. You should have Tashawn come speak at your chapel sometime. He leads our ministry and all those things, and I'm friends with him. Here's the deal. You said, man, those are horrific stories. I hope those things never happen to you. I really do. But if you live this life long enough, I promise you, on your path is both adversity and persecution. It's a simple question. Will you quit? The sun rises high in all of our lives. It could be something as simple as just finishing your degree. What matters to you? Am I teachable? Will I quit? The last one's sneakier. It's the thorns. And Jesus takes them aside and he says this. You get choked. Now, it's funny. I'm not asking you to do this because you'd be weird. But, I mean, if there are two ways to kill somebody, one was shoot them in the face so they died, and the other one was strangle them. Which is faster? Shoot them. So I did a lot of research on how long it would take us. I didn't. I did just for a second, but I thought that's going to be weird. But to be honest with you, in an agrarian society, when a weed grows up, it's not like you're watching, like a harvest grow one day and then a weed just comes up and grabs it and kills it. I mean, because that happened, that'd be cool. Like watching lizards eat worms or something. It's not instant. It'd be boring. But you know what? The weed comes up and eventually it starts to choke the harvest. Are you with me? But it's slow and it's prolonged. So I give you the last two. The last question is this, the last two things that hurt you. Jesus said this, here's what'll choke you. What'll choke you is the deceitfulness of riches and the cares of this world. Now, I'm not going to spend time on the deceitfulness of riches. That's basically materialism. It doesn't mean you shouldn't want to make money. I'm not going to get into that. But it basically means money will lie to you. It'll deceive you. It'll make you live for things you shouldn't. It'll make you pursue things you shouldn't pursue. It'll make you obsessed with things you shouldn't be obsessed with. It'll give you security that's not really there, all that. So that will do it. But the last one, the cares of this world, is it's not just caring for things. If you really take that word apart, it really has to do with worry and anxiety. If you look in other translations, it will say that. This is probably, you've heard this before, but probably about 7 years ago, the number one reason people would come to counseling changed. And it changed from depression to anxiety. Now, I get technically they're both sides of the same coin, and I'm not going to teach a counseling class. So this isn't judgment. I do feel this is compassion. You are an anxious generation. You are. Worried. I won't get into all of it, but I don't know, maybe 10 years from now, and I'm not down on this. I mean, I'm addicted to it too. So's everyone, so don't judge. All right. Here's the thing. Comparison. Unrealistic expectations. Maybe a little narcissism. Not a lot. Your selfies are okay, but come on. I did this today. I went here today. I think this is my opinion. Are you with me? And it creates this anxiety. Eventually, if you don't get a hold of that with the deceitfulness of riches, it'll what? It'll choke you. It just does. And then you have to deal with it. So, 4 questions, and I'm done. To ask yourself, 1, what matters to you? Can you nail that down in your life? Let's just think of something like marriage. I want to be a great spouse, married to somebody who is a lover of Jesus, emotionally intelligent. Then when you decide that matters, it'll change who and how you date. Fair enough? But if it doesn't matter who you end up married to someday, then it doesn't really matter anything about your dating. Fair enough? What matters to you? Number 2, am I teachable? If me talking today ticks you off, you're not. If somebody pushes the button, if somebody messes with your worldview or your politics or your opinions, are you with me? And you can't, hey, I can learn, you're not teachable. Number 3, will you quit? This is the hardest one because no one comes to counseling. No one pays, I won't tell you how much, but, no one's going to pay you $150 an hour. I just want to check in and see how I'm doing. No one does that. They come in when life's hard. And there'll be a time when you'll all want to quit. And it doesn't have to be death. It could be ministry didn't turn out the way you thought. It could be people you thought loved you didn't. Are you with me? There'll come a day you want to quit. You got to decide now, when those days come, I'm not going to what? Quit. And here's the deal. I hope you are all economically blessed. I really mean that. But I will not be deceived by money. And the other one is this. If I'm living my life in a state of anxiety, I will check that. So what's that question? It's kind of the hardest one of all. Am I choking? I don't feel like I'm choking. But if you're in that state and height of anxiety all the time, are you with me? It feels like this, doesn't it? It does. What matters to me? Am I teachable? Will I quit? Am I choking?
Thank you so much, Dr. Cox. I've already got a couple of questions that have come to me. If you have any others, hashtag Calvary Questions on Twitter. I'd love to ask those. Or you can text me if you have my number. How do you become more teachable?
First of all, the fact you're asking the question means you probably will be. I'm serious. But it is a decision, okay? Did you put that one? Good answer. Oh, that's okay. It's cool. Gold star. That's hilarious. Here's the deal. Usually people who aren't teachable think they are, but they don't know it. So better than how to become more teachable, I'll give you the signs you're not. Somebody gives you a different point of view or a different position and you're mad, you're arguing. The places you receive information are all the same. Okay? If you got one podcast you listen to, you've idolized the person, okay? And so pretty soon you can look at, am I open? And I will say this. Here's the biggest one. When I'm disagreeing with somebody and I'm looking for something I can learn. I'm not, I'm really live and let live, but you'd say, I'm going to be careful here. Okay. I probably am not going to line up a lot theologically with Joel Osteen. And cognitively, I think he's dorky. But, hold on, I'm serious. When I listen to him talk, there's something in me that wants to keep listening. And I don't think it's like my flesh. It's like he has a way of encouraging people. You say, well, there's all the heresy. I get it. But there is something to learn there. Does that make sense? I will say this. I will give this. This is a shout out. It's funny. There's my mom and dad over here. Raise your hand. I came up from Springfield. They came up to Springfield so I could take them to see My Fair Lady last night in a musical. That's the reason they're here. So here's the thing. My senior year of high school, I had a teacher named Mr. Gideon. Mr. Gideon was an atheist. I went to public schools, obviously. Mr. Gideon used to brag about how his wife's friends who were Christians would want to come visit him, and he would try to maneuver them and be more intelligent. He was a jerk. He kicked kids out of class. He was a jerk. I wasn't going to get out of that class. He actually was one of the best teachers I ever had. What? He really was. Despite all of that, yeah. Are you open to learn? Does that make sense? So anyway.
Wonderful. And related to that, it used to be, the recommendation used to be read widely if you are not seeming teachable, or if you haven't learned from others. Maybe it was read widely. Is the recommendation today podcast widely, or like what is it? I don't know.
I would say absolutely. We are heading towards a non-literary society. I went to a missions conference the other day that partners with the church. Faith comes by hearing, translating the Bible by taking it to places that would never get it literature-wise, and then the translation is verbal and somebody says it. We are a verbal society. My granddaughter is 10 years old. I can see it highly verbal icons like that. And so definitely that's the way to do it. I'll give you this. You won't learn different things until you read different things and hang out with different people. So I'll give you this one really quicker. Obviously, I'm white, grew up my whole life white. Obviously, I see the world through a white point of view. Befriended a guy who was my age named Ron Haley, was a pastor at the church I was at before. My age, black. I take him to white funerals. He'd take me to black funerals and things like that. Ben, I'm thinking I'm learning, and then one day he said, Jeff, you walk into a room, great Christian guy, you walk into a room and you just think you'll be respected. I said, well, I kind of do. And he goes, I walk into a room thinking I have to earn it every time. Now, here's the deal. I could hang out with all of my culture forever and never know that until I made a friend who was different than what? Me. I'll give you this one, too. This is just one. When are you the dumbest person in the room? On purpose. Because pretty soon we all like to be where we're smart. Why do we have ugly friends? So we can seem the most attractive. I'm just saying that's how it happens. No judgment. And I'm going to tell you what happens. You get to the point where you're the smart one and you're the one doing all that. There's a book years ago written, Enron, when it crashed. I'm old, you don't know who they are. And the reporter wrote, smartest guys in the room. They're smarter than everyone. So this is for teachers, too. If I'm, no offense, some of you are probably brighter than me. You probably are because you had that great answer. But here's the deal. If I'm always hanging out with students or people coming, Pastor Jeff and Dr. Cox and all of that, you know what? Sooner or later, I need to put myself in situations where of the 5 people in the room, I know I'm the dumbest and learn from them. If I don't ever put myself in that place, eventually I'm going to stop what? Learning. So.
Okay, I've got another one that came in here. How do you know if you're being choked? Maybe are there measurable ways, or do you just feel it? Do you just know?
The money's more deceptive. Because I can tell you, like I'm 56, does it choke me? Yeah, I'm thinking about, will I have enough money to retire? I do. And so if you didn't know this, there's these things out there called 401ks, and you're not supposed to look at them. And then like last year, I looked at mine every day. And every day it went down. And then I start thinking, will this ever recover? Will this recover in enough time? You know what I'm doing? I'm choking. I don't control it anyway. The anxiety you can know. Because you know you have it, and nobody wants to have it. And if it was easy as just, hey, you have anxiety today, hey, stop it. Okay, go on. You can't do that. You know you're choking when the anxiety is always over you, the fear and the worry, and it just never what? Dissipates. It never goes away. That's how you know you're choking with that. And no one likes to live like that. Okay, so it's not a judgment. We all struggle with it at times. You say, well, how do I know I start? Like me, I'm a controller. So what do I do when I'm anxious? I just try to control the universe. Well, that never works, okay? But that's what you try to do, okay? So that's how you know when that happens.
If you think that you need to change what you think, if you think you need to change what you think is important, what are some steps that you can take to change that?
So this is cliche. You own your own life. And I'm not getting away from God's bought you with the price, but you have to own like your decisions. So here's the hardest thing. Like you sit and you listen to this and you think, you know what? Graduating is really not important to me. Okay? And I'm not saying it should be. Not every, be careful. If you're here, you should be in college, but not everyone should go to college. Okay? But here's the deal. All right? But here's the thing. For you to work through that, and here's all I would say, and this is going to I'll sound old talking, I don't mean to talk down to you. God does have a plan for you. And God does have things he wants you to experience in his kingdom. And God does have dreams he wants you to realize that are aligned with him. And usually if nothing matters to you, something's got broke along the way that you're apathetic. Does that make sense? Something got broke along the way that there's not something. And it could have been you were a kid and don't do this, or no one encouraged. You know what I'm saying? Something along the line. I do these personality social assessments, and I'll do them sometimes. And I'll do them with, I sound old, but your age all the time. But every once in a while, a lot of times I'll do them with older people. And I remember one time I did one, then they showed career paths, what would have been ideal for somebody. And there was a lady in the group, she's probably almost 50. And it showed that she really would have been great at education, but she hadn't chose that path. And I could see how sad she was sitting there. And she said this, she goes, I always knew I'd be good at that. But she never had the path. She never had the encouragement. You know what I'm saying? And over time, it just got killed. Here's what's not normal. If there's nothing you want to do, that is a spiritual, relational, emotional. You know what I'm saying? That's not how God created you to be. So the steps to take, it could be finding somebody for counsel, for a mentor, to dream again, your friends, but at least open up the perspective to allow God and his Holy Spirit, as the praise was really good today, as they're singing about the Holy Spirit, open up again, God, what you would have me to do that's unique to me, that I can have a passion for my life again. But it's apathy that kills it, okay? And I'm going to just say this, apathy will kill it eventually when you get older. Unless you do this, you don't want it to die when you're in your 20s, okay?
As the band comes, I'd just like to say thank you so much for that. That was a great encouragement. I hope it was to many of us here, and I'll